act like you're worth something. If you disappear, Ryan will have more spending money. My anger reached its peak with my in-laws' heartless words. Despite enduring Ryan's intense womanizing and bad drinking habits, hearing such words from his parents was unbearably painful. I held back tears, packed my essentials, and left the house. Don't come back again. As I walked out with my mother-in-law's voice echoing behind me, I couldn't stop my tears, but I vowed in my heart that this wouldn't end here. I pulled out my phone and called the bank. Freeze all accounts in Ryan's name. My name is Ellie. I lost my parents when I was young and was raised by my grandmother. My grandfather had passed away before I was born, so I never met him. My grandmother spent my parents' and grandfather's inheritance entirely on my education. She even put me through high school. I always thought it would be my turn to care for her someday, but then she passed away. Without my beloved grandmother, I became utterly alone. Of course, I couldn't afford to go to college, but I wanted to do something meaningful. So I studied intensely and took the civil service exam. I passed and was able to join the police force as I had hoped. 5 years later, I met Ryan through a friend. He was 3 years older and worked at a small business run by a friend. He was fun to be around and supportive of my job. After a year of dating, I told him that I didn't have a family. I was worried he might feel pity for me, but he responded differently.
Then maybe I'll become your family, Ellie.
I let out a surprised, "What?" without understanding his intent, but Ryan was serious.
I'll make sure you're happy, Ellie.
He said this and pulled a ring out of his pocket. I couldn't hold back my tears and accepted his proposal crying. And that's how we got married. I thought we would begin a new life together as a married couple, but Ryan had other plans.
Would you consider living with my parents?
Ryan suggested that we live with his parents. Apparently, they wanted to live with us as a couple.
My parents really like you, Ellie. If you're okay with it, I think it could be a good idea.
He said this somewhat awkwardly, but I was thrilled. Of course, let's live together.
Wait, are you sure?
Ryan looked surprised, but I nodded with a smile. We quickly told his parents we would live with them. Having grown up with just my grandmother, it had always been my dream to live with a big family. I knew there would be conflicts, but I believed we'd have happier days together. That's why I was glad to accept the idea of living with them. However, reality turned out to be far from peaceful. Once we started living together, I was responsible for all the household chores. My father-in-law Brian was retired and my mother-in-law Heather was a homemaker, so they were home every day. But they showed no intention of helping with the housework. Ellie, there are dishes just sitting around. I'm sorry, but could you help a little? It's hard to manage everything on my own. Housework is the wife's duty. Just get on with it. She refused to compromise. I also asked Ryan to help with the chores.
I'm busy too. Sorry, but can you handle it, Ellie?
He said this with a half smile. Heather overheard and berated me. Another day, I asked Ryan to pick up something I forgot to buy after he got off work. Unfortunately, Heather found out about it. Ryan worked hard all day. How dare you ask him to do menial tasks? She scolded me, her face red with anger. When we got married, my in-laws seemed like different people.
We're relieved to have someone like you as Ryan's wife.
It must have been hard without family, right? They had said kind words like this when we first met, but now whenever I voiced my opinion, I'd be criticized. I wasn't allowed to ask for help or ease up on the responsibilities. Since then, I stopped expecting any help from Ryan or his parents. I pushed myself to cook, clean, and do laundry despite my busy work schedule. Yet my in-laws didn't appreciate my efforts.
Why is a woman clinging to her job? You probably don't even make much money.
He glared at me saying this. Quit your job and take care of the family. That's where a woman's happiness lies. She cut me off before I could respond.
A wife should be dedicated to her husband and his family. Going out to work without fulfilling that responsibility is improper.
Brian wouldn't even look at me. They interrupted me whenever I tried to share my thoughts. Even though I was managing all the housework, they seemed determined to criticize me as long as I kept working. This same attitude came out again when I asked Ryan to buy groceries. To my in-laws, Ryan was precious, while I seemed to be seen as merely a maid. Perhaps they resented that I worked and wasn't always home. The constant criticism left me feeling exhausted and drained by the time I'd finished my duties. My in-laws didn't know what kind of work I did. That was because of Ryan.
Could you not tell my parents what you do for work?
What? Why? To my surprise, Ryan had asked me to keep my job a secret from his parents. Confused, I questioned his reasoning.
I run a small business. My parents already think I'm under enough pressure. If they knew what you really did, it would make me look bad.
He said this with a sigh, looking defeated. Keeping my job a secret didn't sit right with me, but Ryan pushed further.
If they found out you were more successful, they'd probably want you to quit.
I couldn't help but gasp. Ryan's parents were old-fashioned, valuing men as the breadwinners. If they knew I earned more, they might not take it well. But I thought Ryan was overthinking it. Still, he was adamant, so I reluctantly agreed. Ryan told his parents I worked part-time at a factory. This led them to see me as an unambitious, mediocre woman who wasn't fulfilling her duties.
A part-time worker like you shouldn't act so high and mighty.
Brian scoffed, while Heather looked at me as if I were worthless. But I refused to quit my job. It was my purpose and meant everything to me. Despite their constant insults, I had no intention of giving it up. One day, Ryan came home late.
Work's been busy lately.
He looked tired, but from that day on, he started coming home around midnight. He also began staying out all day on weekends. At first, I assumed he was taking some time to relax from work, but over time, I began to feel suspicious. Lately, you've been coming home late and going out more often. Where are you going?
It's work. Didn't I tell you things are busy? I've been working weekends too.
When I pressed him, Ryan responded casually, without meeting my eyes. That only made me more suspicious. Are you hiding something from me?
There's nothing to hide.
Ryan looked slightly annoyed, giving me a brief look. I wanted clarity on the matter, but just then, Heather entered the room.
She's unhappy because I'm coming home late, apparently.
Who do you think you are to question him? Heather glared at me angrily, while Ryan looked relieved that she had interrupted. You sometimes work late at night, but I have no way of knowing if that's even true. My voice grew louder as I expressed my frustration, but Heather immediately cut me off. You're the one who's suspicious. Stop causing trouble over Ryan coming home late. I apologized as she yelled at me, and both of them left the room. I was left sitting there in shock, unable to move. Later, when I returned to our room, Ryan seemed apologetic.
I'm sorry, Ellie.
What do you want from me? Do you want me to quit my job like your parents keep saying? I asked him this, and he looked flustered.
If you quit, I couldn't support everyone alone.
His response surprised me, given that my income was significantly higher than his. Despite knowing this, he still insisted on keeping my job a secret from his parents. I questioned whether there was any benefit to this secrecy, but I couldn't voice it to him. At that time, I still believed in Ryan. The harassment from my in-laws only worsened after that. Ryan openly criticized me within earshot, finding fault in everything I did. He even complained about the meals I prepared, no matter how carefully I made them. Heather imposed strict restrictions on me. When I tried to bathe, she'd turn off the gas, claiming it was a waste. She'd even drain the bathtub before I could use it, forcing me to shower in cold water. Worried for my health, I began bathing at my workplace before coming home. But even that didn't stop their harassment. One day after coming home from work, I noticed my room's door was open. When I checked inside, my cosmetics and jewelry were missing. Heather, did you enter my room? I asked Heather right away. What are you accusing me of? She looked angry, denying it outright. Brian also acted innocent, but my room had clearly been rummaged through. In that case, it might have been an intruder. I'll report it to the police. When I calmly mentioned calling the police, both of them looked startled.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Are you hiding something you don't want us to see?
Brian even tried to snatch my phone from me. It was clear that they had invaded my room. From that day on, I installed a simple lock on my door. Putting a lock on your door? You must have something to hide. Heather complained, but I ignored her. As a result, they began monitoring me even more closely. Whenever I was in my room, they would listen in at the door, trying to catch any sounds. If I answered the phone, Heather would ask, Who are you talking to? Are you having an affair? If I was doing housework, Brian would come over and say, Just hurry up and finish already. Are you really working, or are you just fooling around with someone? I felt more on edge at home than I ever did at work. I knew the situation wouldn't improve, so I decided I had to tell Ryan. I explained how his parents kept entering my room without permission.
You know how they are. My dad has always been like that.
But that wasn't the only issue. I told him about the cold showers, the restrictions on shopping, and how I couldn't even use the bathroom freely.
Doesn't your workplace have a shower?
Despite my efforts to convey my struggles, Ryan just smiled and dismissed my concerns. His response left me feeling helpless and frightened. How long do I have to endure this? I keep my job a secret and face this treatment at home, and you won't even help me. My voice rose in frustration, and Ryan sighed.
If you hate it that much, just quit your job. Then maybe my parents will stop bothering you.
I was speechless. I had thought he understood my passion for my work, but he seemed annoyed now.
I'm tired too, you know. I don't want to hear you complain about my parents all the time.
He said this as he took a beer from the fridge. Recently, Ryan's drinking had noticeably increased. At home, he always had a drink in hand, and whenever he drank, he would refuse to listen to me, shouting at me if I tried to talk. Normally, I would hold back, but that day I couldn't stay silent. Are you really going to work, or are you spending time with someone else?
What are you implying?
Ryan's tone became cold, but I pressed on. You're having an affair, aren't you?
Why do you think that?
He downed his beer and glared at me. Your spending has increased, and I've seen charges on my card that I don't recognize. His response was indifferent.
So what? If you're unhappy, we can get a divorce.
A divorce? I was stunned by his words and couldn't respond right away.
If we divorce, you'll be all alone. But if that's what you want, go ahead.
He said this with a satisfied look on his face. So you admit it. You're cheating, aren't you?
Without proof, don't accuse me. If you're serious, bring the divorce papers. I'll sign them.
Ryan left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had trusted him, thinking he'd change if he realized his mistakes, but something inside me finally snapped. Ryan refused to protect me, and my in-laws continued to oppress me without knowing the truth. I decided there was no reason to sacrifice myself for people like them anymore. I made a phone call to set things in motion. The next morning, Ryan had stayed out all night again. As I prepared breakfast after my night shift, Brian loudly remarked from the kitchen.
Out all night again. Who knows what she's doing out there?
I sighed and brought the food to the table. I told you I work night shifts. Why are you always so suspicious? I tried to keep my frustration in check, but Brian glared at me.
You say it's a night shift, but you're probably out there cheating. Don't talk back to me.
As he spoke, Heather nodded in agreement, clearly delighted. Their words pushed my anger to the limit. It was painful enough to endure Ryan's womanizing and drinking habits, but to hear this from his parents was unbearable. It seems pointless to explain anything to you. I'm leaving. I held back my rage, went to my room, and began packing my belongings. I knew it. Just hurry up and divorce Ryan already.
You're probably hiding something. You're nothing but a parasite.
My in-laws continued to hurl insults, but I ignored them, carrying my bags to the entrance. If you're gone, Ryan's allowance will go up. I'm sure he'll be happy about that. She kept following me to the door, saying, a wife like you isn't what's best for him. I've had enough. Thank you for everything. And don't ever come back. With her final words echoing behind me, I walked away, tears streaming down my face. But I didn't stop. I promised myself that this wasn't over. I took out my phone and made a call. The call was to the bank. I introduced myself and said firmly, please freeze all accounts under Ryan's name. This way, they would face the consequences of their actions. I knew they would be shocked once they realized. The following day, just as I expected, my in-laws called me.
What is going on? The bank account and cards aren't working.
Ryan sounded furious on the phone. Ryan probably tried to make an online purchase, or Heather might have tried to withdraw cash from an ATM and failed. You must have stolen money from Ryan's account. This is a crime, you know? They seemed eager to accuse me of theft, but they couldn't have been more mistaken. It was time to reveal the truth. I didn't steal anything. The account you've been using is actually in my name. The joint account for our savings is also in my name.
Don't be ridiculous. A part-time lawyer like you wouldn't have that kind of money.
He laughed, but I held my ground. Checked the credit cards in the drawer. They all have my name on them. That can't be possible. I could hear them fumbling to check the cards. After a few moments, I heard a scream on the other end of the line. Why is everything in your name? Even the credit cards.
You must have switched the names on everything. This is fraud.
They were frantic, trying to make sense of the situation, but they were only grasping at straws. Ryan is unemployed. That's why the accounts are under my name. My voice grew cold as I stated this, and silence fell on the other end of the call. They seemed to struggle to understand what I was saying. Ryan had left his job 6 months ago after causing trouble at work. He'd been pretending to go to the office, but was actually spending his days in internet cafes. A private investigator had revealed that he'd also been meeting multiple women through dating apps. He apparently got involved with his boss's wife, which led to his forced resignation. In a small company like his, there was no way he could stay after that scandal. Even after losing his job, he continued seeing other women and spent all his part-time income on them. Meanwhile, I was the one earning money to support our household.
What nonsense are you talking about? A part-timer like you couldn't support this household.
Brian scoffed, dismissing my words with a laugh. I'm a police officer. I said it plainly, finally revealing the truth. Ryan had asked me to keep it a secret, but I had nothing left to hide. My in-laws, who had constantly criticized me as useless and uneducated, were speechless. They were too shocked to respond, and I took the chance to continue. I couldn't tell you because Ryan asked me not to. I explained calmly that I had been working hard as a police officer to support the family. I also revealed that Ryan had manipulated the truth about my job to make himself look better. I told them I had continued to work and saved money for our future, while he secretly spent it on other women.
So what if you're a police officer? We never asked for your help or depended on your earnings.
Brian tried to brush it off with a scornful laugh. That's fine. You don't need to rely on me anymore because I won't be around. I answered firmly, without a trace of doubt. I then showed them documentation of all the harassment and mistreatment I'd endured from them. What is all this? Heather's eyes widened as she looked through the evidence. I had gathered proof of their constant intrusions, insults, and even instances where they rummaged through my belongings. I had set up a recording device in my room and a hidden camera, capturing them going through my things. I had audio recordings of them insulting and berating me, along with proof of their attempts to sabotage my daily life.
You can't do anything with this. We're family, and family can't be charged with such things.
He responded smugly, assuming he knew the law better than me. That's right. Family members can't be held accountable for things like this. Both of them seemed reassured, but I was unfazed. While criminal charges might not apply, I can still sue you for damages in a civil court. The two of them went silent at this. They hadn't considered the possibility of a civil suit. I stood up, gathering my belongings. I'll be going now. I turned my back on them, only to hear Brian calling out in desperation.
Wait, this wasn't harassment. We just wanted you to understand our family values.
Yes, Ellie, you're just being overly sensitive.
Their pitiful excuses only fueled my anger. I turned back, speaking with a conviction I hadn't felt before. You never intended to make me feel welcome in this house. You constantly degraded me, calling me useless and uneducated. I let all my frustrations spill out, watching as they recoiled in fear. After leaving my in-laws' house, I contacted a lawyer. In truth, I had already consulted with both a private investigator and a lawyer. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, I had Ryan summoned there. He arrived with a puzzled expression, looking around the office. I could smell the stench of alcohol on him. He'd clearly been drinking all night. His mood seemed unusually cheerful, which made me suspect he had been with another woman. You've been cheating on me, haven't you? Not just with one woman, but several. Ryan sneered, not even attempting to deny it.
So what? Got a problem with that?
So you admit it. You even lost your job because of one of your affairs, didn't you? He looked briefly irritated, but then shrugged.
If you're unhappy, we can get a divorce.
He seemed to think that the mere threat of divorce would silence me. Maybe he believed I'd fear social judgment if I divorced him. Fine, I agree. Let's get divorced. His expression shifted, surprised by my response.
Well, whatever. You'll regret it, though. I thought police officers had a sense of responsibility. Guess you weren't responsible as a wife.
His words were intended to make me feel guilty, but I was unfazed. I pulled out the divorce papers and placed them in front of him. Go ahead, sign them.
Fine, but I'll be fine without you. I'll just find someone else.
He laughed as he picked up a pen, completely oblivious to what he'd lose. I wonder what those women see in you. My voice was calm, almost conversational. He paused, glaring at me.
What are you implying?
They're drawn to the lifestyle funded by my money, not you. He looked at me confused. You've been using our joint savings, haven't you? That money is gone now, so your little fun won't last.
What do you mean, gone?
He looked genuinely baffled, as though he couldn't understand my words. Once we're divorced, you won't have access to my accounts or savings anymore. You'll have to depend on your parents.
What?
His face turned pale, and he began to tremble slightly. The reality of the situation seemed to finally hit him.
I'm sorry, Ellie. Please don't go through with the divorce. I need you.
He realized he'd lose his financial support and begged for me to reconsider, but it was too late.
I promise I'll change. My parents won't bother you anymore.
His desperate pleas were almost comical after everything he'd put me through. I couldn't help but smile, amused by his predictable words. It was as if he'd forgotten all the disdain he and his parents had shown me, now that his own position was at risk. I realized he was only interested in my money, not in me. What you really need is access to my money, isn't it? Supporting your parents and maintaining your lifestyle on a part-time job won't be easy. I said this with a smile, and his face contorted in frustration. Also, since your cheating is a cause for the divorce, I'll be asking for alimony. If you refuse, I'll contact all the women you've been seeing."
Contact them? What do you mean?
He murmured, avoiding eye contact. "I have enough evidence to demand compensation from each of them. I already know who they are and have their contact details." I smiled as I laid the evidence photos in front of him. His eyes widened in shock as he looked over the photos. I could see him finally comprehending the severity of his situation. Even if he tried to avoid paying alimony, I'd still reach out to his mistresses for compensation. This meant that if he didn't cooperate, he'd be shunned by the very women he'd relied on. So don't think you can run from this. With that, I left the matter to my lawyer and walked out of the office. Ryan didn't argue further. I later heard that he quietly listened to my lawyer's explanation and agreed to pay the alimony. He even signed the divorce papers and handed them to the lawyer before leaving, a shadow of his former self. A few days later, the alimony was transferred in full, and I officially filed the divorce papers at City Hall. My marriage to Ryan was finally over. As I promised, I also filed a civil suit against my in-laws for emotional distress. The court ruled in my favor, and I received compensation from both Ryan and his parents. The amount was small, but the victory was priceless. At last, my battle was over. A friend later told me that Ryan and his parents had sold their house and moved into a small apartment. Between the alimony and the lawsuit, they were now deep in debt. His parents had even taken up part-time jobs to make ends meet. For people who had lived off my earnings, this new life must be incredibly harsh. Ryan was abandoned by his mistresses and had no one left. I heard he's now attending a formal marriage agency, but with no success so far. Looking back, I'm grateful. Ryan insisted on keeping my job a secret from his parents. If they had known I was a police officer, they would have exploited me even further, and divorcing might have been harder. I shudder to think of it. In that one regard, I owe Ryan a bit of thanks. I returned to my independent life in the women's police dormitory. After yearning for a family and looking forward to living together, I was now content and enjoying living alone. Married life had been nothing but painful, but now I was free, filled with a sense of liberation. I could focus on my work and felt fulfilled each day. Despite everything, I was relieved I didn't let my in-laws break me down. Now, I'm committed to protecting citizens and hope to reduce the number of people who suffer as I did. Every day, I work to make the world a safer, kinder place for everyone.